Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here with us. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the world. So I'm going to present some work that builds on the ECSC modeling, but tries to position it in a way that might help drive in-country action. And so here we're going to talk about the prevalence of death in people with vision impairment from cataracts before treatment, with a case study from Kenya. This was published today in the Lancet Health Longevity. The work that I'm sharing is the work that was partaken by the co-authors who are here on the page. And we probably don't need to tell anyone who's on this call that cataract is a very well-known, long-standing condition that has been reported for over 4,000 years in different forms of literature, for which we've made humongous progress in terms of treatment innovation. Yet the reality is we're not progressing as fast as we need to. This, for me, is something that became very visceral whilst living in Kenya 15 years ago and seeing blind patients coming to the outreach clinics that I was part of, and seeing that many people attending these clinics had often been blind for a decade, such as these two ladies who were in one of the outreach clinics who were both blind from cataract. The lady on the left had been blind for more than 10 years, and the person sat next to her was her best friend. But until a few moments after this photo was taken, they didn't know they were sat next to each other. So blindness had not only removed their sight, it had removed their community, and it had removed the connection to the things that they love. So as we look at this data, it's really important for us to always come back to framing who are the people that we are trying to solve this for. And so when we look at the data that we've just heard, what we've tried to do as a group is build a dynamic model that takes this snapshot data, which has, here's effective cataract surgical coverage, and if we simplify it now to just the surgery has had a good outcome. So you end up with what we call the cataract can. So in this model, the only way from the backlog through to the operated is by having cataract surgery. And this can be measured through an indicator called the cataract surgical rate. So that's the number of cataract operations per million of population per year. And so that tells us the rate at which people are moving from the backlog into the treated group. The other important measure is how many people are being added to that backlog over time, because the backlog isn't static. So people are added to the backlog. And that happens as people go from normal vision to mild impairment and so on as they develop more severe forms of cataract. So if the incidence of the new cases are greater than the number of operations happening in any given year, the backlog will grow. Conversely, if it's the other way around, if the cataract surgical rate is greater than the incidence, we can expect to start eroding away at the backlog. And so statistically speaking, the only other way out of the backlog other than surgery is to die prior to receiving treatment. So from an epidemiological perspective, you either leave the backlog having had surgery or having died prior to receiving the opportunity for surgery. So to try and kind of conceive of this as a dynamic model, I like to think of it as a bathtub. So if you imagine the incidence, so the new cases is the rate at which water is coming from the tap in to fill the bathtub. The backlog, which is the amount of water in the bathtub at any one point in time. And the cataract surgical rate is the rate at which it drains out of the bathtub. So if the water coming in and the water draining is at the same rate, then the bathtub level remains the same. If the drainage is greater than the inflow of water, then we would expect the level to drop. And conversely, if the inflow is greater than the outflow, we'll expect it to start overflowing. And that overflowing is the equivalent of people leaving the backlog having died, not having been treated. So we've tried to build a dynamic model to show what is going on based on data from Kenya. So we've been lucky to work with Ministry of Health in Kenya and multiple colleagues to model this scenario. And before I share the data from this model, we do want to position that Kenya, when we look at the ECSC data, this is from the paper that Matthew shared, Kenya is relative to other countries in the region, actually one of the highest performing countries in terms of its ECSC and CSC metrics. So just to hold that in mind as we go through this model. So to build this model, we needed data from a few different sources. So one was from a large set of RAB7 surveys conducted across 14 counties in Kenya across 2002 and 2022 to 23, which was supported by CBM in the Vision Impact Project. And the data from that showed us that for Kenya as a whole, on the backlog as of 2025, we estimate there to be 360,000 people who are needing a cataract operation today. We also have estimates in terms of the cataract surgical rate. So the surgical rate, so per million, is about 700 per million, which works out to be about 40,000 operations per year. To calculate the incidence, the ideal mechanism is to have a cohort study. So to be able to track people over time and see how many people develop vision loss from cataract over a period of time. And we do have that data from the Nakuru eye disease cohort study. So my colleague here from many years ago at ICH, Wenjiku Matenge, conducted a large population survey in 2007 and 8. And then I followed up those 5,000 people 6 years later to see how many of those people over time had developed vision impairment and developed cataract as a cause. And that required going to 100 different locations, doing very detailed assessments of everyone's vision status and ocular health. So we used the data from that 6-year study to determine the incidence of cataracts, the number of new cases joining the backlog. And in summary, we found that to be 120,000 new people per year developing vision impairment from cataract. So straight away, as you look at this model, the inflow is 3 times greater than the outflow. And also bearing in mind, incidence is person level joining, but cataract surgical rate, 40,000 surgeries doesn't necessarily mean 40,000 people being operated on. It works out to be an operation per 1.3 people. So in other words, for about every 4 surgeries, that happens on 3 people. So that leaves us with the question of, given that inflow and outflow, how many people are dying before they access treatment? And so the summary of the model, which is detailed in the paper, including all of the assumptions around the model, show that between the year 2025 and 2030, of that original 360,000 people on the backlog, we expect 236,000 of them to have died by 2030. And then if we push that out to 2040, by which time everybody on the backlog has either been treated or died, is 280,000 of that original 360. You can also see the backlog has grown from 360 to 635. And so in conclusion, that means 77% of all of the people who were on the backlog today are projected to die before they get the opportunity to access treatment. So 3 in every 4 people. So we can leave you with that sobering message that although we're making progress, the cost is very human, and we're not progressing fast enough. And although for these 2 ladies, the result was a positive one, they both were able to access surgery, and it restored their sight and their connection to one another. What we do know is, sadly, although these are the stories we like to tell, the reality is that isn't the story for most people. For every 4 people today who need a cataract operation, as things stand, only 1 will access it. Thank you very much for listening.